My name is Yana Morales, and I'm speaking to you from beyond the grave. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd leave behind recordings. But then again, I never thought my own family would treat my funeral like an optional social event either. If you're listening to this, it means the worst has happened, and the people I spent 38 years protecting have finally shown their true colors. Let me take you back to those final weeks of my life, when I was still foolishly believing that love and loyalty ran both ways in the Morales family. It was a Tuesday morning in September when Diego called. I was rushing to get ready for work, my coffee still brewing, when my phone buzzed with that familiar ringtone I'd assigned to my younger brother, the one that always meant trouble. "Yana, thank God you picked up." His voice came through breathless and panicked. "I need a favor, a big one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." I closed my eyes and leaned against my kitchen counter. The same counter I'd had to repair myself because I couldn't afford a contractor after helping Diego with his last emergency. "How much this time, Diego?" "It's not what you think. Well, okay, it is what you think, but this is different. The landlord is threatening eviction, and I've got this incredible business opportunity. Remember that food truck idea I told you about? Well, there's an investor meeting this Friday, and if I can just get through this month—" "How much?" I repeated, watching my coffee drip steadily into the pot. Such a simple, predictable process. I wished my family could be half as reliable as my old coffee maker. "I'll transfer it this afternoon," I said, already calculating how this would affect my own budget. No weekend trip to visit my friend Sarah in Milwaukee. No new winter coat, even though my current one had a tear in the lining. No dinner out this month. "You're saving my life, Yana. Seriously, I don't know what I'd do without you." But he'd never have to find out, would he? Because I'd always be there, the reliable older sister, the family safety net, the one who cleaned up everyone else's messes while my own life remained perpetually on hold. After I hung up, I sat in my small kitchen and looked around at my modest life. My apartment was clean, but cramped, furnished with secondhand pieces I'd carefully chosen and refurnished myself. I made good money as a financial analyst, but most of it disappeared into the endless black hole of my family's needs. That evening, Mommy called during dinner. Teresa Morales had a way of timing her calls for maximum inconvenience, as if she could sense when I was finally settling down for a moment of peace. "Mija, I saw Elena's daughter at the grocery store today. She's engaged to that doctor from Northwestern. Such a good match." Elena was glowing with pride. I twirled my fork through my leftover pasta, knowing where this conversation was heading. It was the same path it always took. "That's nice for them, Mommy." "You know, you're not getting any younger, Yana. 38 is not young for a woman. And you have a good job. You could attract a professional man, someone stable, but you spend so much time with work and helping your brother and sister that you never put yourself out there." The irony was suffocating. I couldn't put myself out there because I was too busy keeping everyone else afloat. But pointing that out would only lead to the lecture about family obligations and how everything they'd done was for our future. "I'm fine, Mommy. I'm not in a hurry." Fine is not having a family of your own at 38. Fine is not sitting alone in that little apartment while life passes you by. You know what Elena told me? Her daughter met her fiancé at a charity gala. These things take effort, mija. You can't just wait for Prince Charming to show up at your office. After I hung up, I sat in my living room, feeling the familiar weight of being not quite enough. Not married enough, not social enough, not successful in the ways that mattered to my parents. But somehow I was successful enough to be their backup plan whenever money got tight. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. Instead of heading straight home after work, I drove to the south side, to a building that most people would drive past with. Second glance. The Esperanza Youth Foundation occupied a converted warehouse that had seen better decades, but inside, magic happened every day. Miss Yana! 12-year-old Sophia launched herself at me the moment I walked through the door. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time in days, I felt my shoulders relax. "I've been practicing the math problems you showed me," she said, pulling me toward a table covered with homework sheets. "Want to see?" For the next 2 hours, I helped Sophia with algebra, played chess with Marcus, and listened to Lucia read a story she'd written about a girl who could talk to butterflies. These kids had every reason to be cynical about adults and their promises, but they still believed in dreams, still thought anything was possible. Mr. Alvarez, the foundation director, walked over as I was getting ready to leave. "Yana, I can't thank you enough for the new computers. The kids are so excited about the coding class we're starting next month." I smiled, thinking about the anonymous donation I'd made the week before. My family would never understand why I'd spend money on other people's children when I didn't even have my own. But these kids didn't see me as a bank account or a solution to their problems. They saw me as someone who cared, someone who showed up. "They deserve every opportunity," I said, meaning it completely. As I drove home through the Chicago streets, I felt the familiar tug of two different worlds. In one world, I was Yana, the perpetual rescuer, the family ATM, the unmarried disappointment. In the other, I was simply Yana, someone whose presence mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with money. I had no way of knowing that in just 3 weeks, one of those worlds would have to continue without me. The accident happened on a Wednesday. I remember thinking that was somehow fitting. Not dramatic enough for a Monday, too early in the week for a Friday finale. Just a perfectly ordinary Wednesday that became anything but ordinary. I was reviewing quarterly reports for a client presentation when the scaffolding outside our building collapsed. 26 floors up, we thought we were safe from construction accidents. We were wrong. A piece of steel beam crashed through the conference room window just as I was walking past. The irony wasn't lost on me later. I'd spent years protecting everyone else, but I couldn't protect myself from a random piece of metal and the cruel timing of the universe. Naomi Clark was the first person the hospital called. She was listed as my emergency contact, a decision I'd made 2 years earlier during one of those routine HR updates. Not my parents, not my siblings, but Naomi, my closest friend and the only person who truly knew me. She told me later about that phone call, how the words "workplace accident" and "didn't make it" echoed in her head as she dropped everything and raced to Mercy General. Naomi was the one who identified my body, signed the paperwork, and made the calls that would ripple through my family like stones thrown into still water. The first call she made was to my parents. "Teresa, this is Naomi, Yana's friend from work. I have some very difficult news." According to Naomi, there was a pause, followed by my mother's voice. "Is she hurt? Because we have the Rodriguez wedding this Saturday, and I really can't deal with drama right now." Drama. That's what my death was to my mother, an inconvenience that threatened to interfere with social obligations. When Naomi finally managed to communicate that I was gone, truly gone, my mother's first concern wasn't grief. It was logistics. "Well, when is the funeral? Because Luis has a doctor's appointment next Tuesday that he's been waiting months for, and I have my book club on Thursday. Can we do it over the weekend? And please tell me it's not going to be one of those all-day affairs. You know how these things can drag on." Naomi told me she had to sit down in the hospital parking lot after that call, staring at her phone in disbelief. She'd expected tears, shock, maybe even denial. She hadn't expected my mother to treat my death like a scheduling conflict. The call to Diego went to voicemail. He was in meetings all day, preparing for what he called the pitch that's going to change everything. The pitch I'd unknowingly funded with my final loan to him just weeks earlier. When he finally called back that evening, his first words were,
Naomi, hey, sorry I missed your call. Today was insane. Listen, I can't really talk long because I'm taking investors to dinner, but Yana mentioned you might call about something. What's up? Naomi, I'm calling about Yana. She she died today. There was an accident at her office. The silence stretched so long that Naomi thought the call had dropped. Finally, Diego spoke. Are you serious? This isn't some kind of joke, is it? Because I literally cannot deal with any family drama right now. This investor meeting is the most important thing that's ever happened to me.
Even after Naomi convinced him she wasn't joking, Diego's next concern wasn't about making arrangements or comforting our parents. It was about whether the funeral could wait until after his presentation. I know how this sounds, but Yana would understand. She always said families should support each other's dreams, and this is my dream finally coming true. She'd want me to prioritize this opportunity. Naomi said she found herself wondering if we were talking about the same person. The Yana who'd supported everyone else's dreams by sacrificing her own, who'd postponed her own life indefinitely to keep everyone else moving forward. Isabella's reaction was perhaps the most telling of all. She was at a yoga retreat in Sedona when Naomi finally reached her, and her response was filtered through the lens of her own self-absorption. Oh my God, that's terrible. Poor Yana. You know, she always worried about everything so much. I kept telling her she needed to relax more, maybe try meditation or find a spiritual practice. All that stress probably weakened her immune system. Naomi had to explain that being struck by falling construction debris had nothing to do with stress or immune systems, but Isabella was already moving on to her own concerns. This is going to completely mess up my October schedule. I have Sarah's engagement party next weekend. She's been planning it for months, and I'm in the wedding party. And then there's the charity gala for childhood cancer research. I'm on the planning committee, and they're counting on me. When Naomi suggested that Isabella might want to come home for her sister's funeral, the response was breathtaking in its selfishness. Of course I want to be there, but I have commitments, important commitments that people are counting on me for. Yana would understand. She was always so practical about these things. Besides, it's not like being there is going to bring her back, right? That night, Naomi sat in her apartment, surrounded by the phone calls she'd had to make. The funeral home, the church, my insurance company, my employer, and realized she was planning my funeral essentially alone. The people who should have been devastated were treating my death like a minor inconvenience that hopefully wouldn't disrupt their schedules too much. She told me later that she'd never felt so angry and heartbroken at the same time. Angry at my family for their callousness, heartbroken that I'd spent my life pouring love into people who couldn't even be bothered to properly mourn me. But I wasn't completely abandoned. The next morning, when Naomi called the Youth Foundation to let Mr. Alvarez know what had happened, she heard something my family never offered. Genuine grief. Miss Yana she's gone? His voice broke over the phone. But she was just here last week, helping Sophia with her college application essays. She brought supplies for the art program. She was supposed to help judge the science fair next month. Within an hour, Naomi's phone was ringing with calls from the foundation, not asking about logistics or complaining about timing, but asking what they could do, how they could help, whether there was anything Yana would have wanted. The contrast was stark and heartbreaking. The people who barely knew me were devastated. The people who'd known me my entire life were inconvenienced. The day of my funeral dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of Chicago October morning that makes you want to crawl back into bed and pretend the world doesn't exist. Maybe that's why it felt so fitting. Even the weather seemed to understand that something important was ending with very little fanfare. St. Margaret's Catholic Church had been my family's parish for 20 years, though none of us had attended regularly since I was a teenager. The building was beautiful in that timeless way that makes you think about eternity and legacy, which seemed appropriate for someone whose legacy was about to surprise everyone. Naomi arrived early, carrying flowers and a framed photo of me from last Christmas. It wasn't a professional portrait, just a candid shot of me laughing at something she had said, wearing the red sweater she had given me for my birthday. She said later that she chose it because it was the most me photo she could find, the one that captured who I was when nobody was keeping score of what I owed or what I'd provided. By the time the service was supposed to start, the church was maybe a quarter full. The Youth Foundation had come out in force. Mr. Alvarez, 3 staff members, and a dozen kids ranging from age 8 to 17. They filled an entire pew, dressed in their best clothes, holding handmade cards they'd created for me. Sophia clutched a drawing of the two of us working on math problems together, tears streaming down her face. My coworkers had sent a beautiful arrangement, though only 2 of them attended in person. Mrs. Henderson from down the hall came, along with my mailman, who told Naomi that he was the only person on his route who ever offered him water on hot days. And then there was my family. My parents arrived 15 minutes late, Teresa clicking across the church floor in heels that echoed off the stone walls. She was dressed appropriately, in black, but I could tell she was irritated about something. The traffic, the timing, or maybe just the inconvenience of it all.
"The parking here is terrible," she whispered to Luis as they slid into a pew 3 rows behind where they should have been sitting. "And I still don't understand why we couldn't have done this at that new funeral home with better facilities." Luis nodded absently, checking his watch and clearly thinking about somewhere else he'd rather be. Throughout the entire service, he kept glancing at his phone, presumably checking messages from work or maybe sports scores. Diego was nowhere to be seen. True to his word, he'd prioritized his investor meeting over his sister's funeral. He'd sent an elaborate arrangement of white lilies with a card that read, "Sorry I can't be there. You know I'd want to be. D." Even his apology managed to be about him and what he wanted. Isabella had outdone herself with creative excuses. Not only was she still in Arizona, but she'd actually posted Instagram stories throughout the morning from what appeared to be a spa day. Champagne mimosas by the pool, a massage appointment, a yoga class called Releasing Negative Energy. The cruel irony of that last one wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. When Father Martinez asked if anyone wanted to share memories of me, my parents sat in stony silence. It was Naomi who stood up, her hands shaking as she walked to the podium. "Yana Morales was the strongest person I ever knew," she began, her voice barely steady. But not in the way you might think. She wasn't strong because she could carry everyone else's burdens, though she did that for years. She was strong because she never lost her capacity for love, even when that love wasn't returned in equal measure. Naomi talked about my secret volunteer work, the kids I tutored, the supplies I bought with money I couldn't really spare. She talked about my dreams, the trips I wanted to take, the art classes I'd planned to enroll in someday, the novel I'd started writing in a notebook I kept hidden in my bedroom drawer. She gave pieces of herself to everyone around her, Naomi continued, tears flowing freely now. But somewhere along the way, the people who should have treasured those pieces started treating them like they were owed them. Like Yana's love and sacrifice were just the natural order of things, not precious gifts that should have been cherished. I could see my mother shifting uncomfortably in her pew, and Luis had the decency to put his phone away. But their discomfort didn't translate into understanding or regret. It was just annoyance at being called out, even indirectly. When Naomi finished speaking, 8-year-old Marcus from the foundation stood up on his pew and raised his hand. "Can I say something about Miss Yana?" Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Father Martinez nodded kindly, and Marcus walked to the front with the confidence that children possess when they have something important to say. "Miss Yana helped me with reading when I was scared it was too hard. She never made me feel stupid, not even once. She bought me books about astronauts because I told her I wanted to go to space someday. She said dreams were the most important thing anyone could have, and that mine were just as important as anyone else's." By the time Marcus finished, half the congregation was crying. But not my parents. They sat watching this 8-year-old express more genuine love for their daughter than they'd managed to show in months. As people filed out of the church, Naomi lingered, accepting condolences and collecting the cards the foundation kids had made. My parents approached her with what I recognized as their handling business expressions.
Naomi, we should talk about Yana's affairs. The insurance, the bank accounts, her apartment. We'll need to coordinate the estate settlement. Even at my funeral, they were thinking about money. Not about who would miss me or how to honor my memory, but about what assets needed to be liquidated and distributed. Actually, Naomi said carefully, Yana made me her executor. She left very specific instructions about her estate and how it should be handled. I watched from whatever realm allowed me to witness this moment as my parents exchanged glances. They weren't suspicious yet, just assuming that Yana had been efficient as always, making their job easier by organizing everything neatly. Well, that's very responsible of her. When can we meet to go over the details? I assume she left everything to family, so it should be straightforward. Naomi's smile was polite but careful. We'll be meeting with the attorney next week. I'll call you with the details. As the church emptied, I realized that my funeral had perfectly illustrated the divide that had defined my life. On one side, the people who truly loved me, Naomi, the foundation kids, my coworkers who remembered kindness, neighbors who appreciated small gestures. On the other, my family, present in body but absent in heart, already thinking about how to move on from the inconvenience of my death.
But they had no idea what was coming. None of them suspected that their assumptions about my estate were about to be shattered, or that I'd finally found a way to show them exactly how it felt to be invisible and undervalued. The real reckoning was still to come. In the 3 weeks following my funeral, my family transformed from grieving relatives into eager heirs. Well, grieving might be too generous a term. They'd moved through the socially acceptable period of sadness with remarkable efficiency, and were now focused on what they considered the important business at hand: my money. I watched from whatever realm allows the dead to witness the living as they calculated, planned, and spent my estate in their minds long before they knew what it actually contained. The conversations would have been comical if they weren't so heartbreaking. Teresa was the first to bring up practical matters, as she liked to call anything involving money. She'd invited Luis over for dinner just 4 days after my funeral, ostensibly to discuss arrangements, but really to start dividing up assets that didn't belong to them yet. "We need to be smart about this," she said, serving Luis his favorite arroz con pollo while CNN droned in the background. Yana was always so organized with her finances. I'm sure she left everything properly documented. Luis nodded, cutting into his chicken with the methodical precision he applied to everything. She had that good job, the life insurance from work, plus whatever she saved. Should be enough to make a real difference. "I've been thinking about that little condo development in Sarasota. You remember the one Maria's sister bought into? 2 bedrooms, right on the water, perfect for retirement. With Yana's money, we could finally afford the down payment." They talked about my life insurance like it was a lottery ticket they'd been waiting years to cash in on. $50,000 from my employer, plus another $25,000 from the policy I had maintained independently. $75,000 that they had already allocated to their Florida retirement dream. "What about Diego and Isabella?" Luis asked, between bites. Teresa waved her hand dismissively. "There'll be plenty left over. Yana's apartment alone must be worth something, plus all her savings. You know how careful she was with money, probably has more saved than we think." If they had bothered to ask, I could have told them exactly how much I had saved. $37,000, accumulated over years of careful budgeting and constant sacrifice. Money that had been earmarked for my own dreams. The European trip I'd been planning since college, the down payment on a house with a real garden, the emergency fund that would let me finally breathe freely. But they never asked about my dreams, not while I was alive, and certainly not after I was gone. Diego's assumptions were even more grandiose. While my parents planned their modest retirement upgrade, my brother was telling anyone who would listen that his financial troubles were about to be solved permanently. I learned about his promises secondhand,
through conversations Naomi overheard when she went to my apartment to collect personal items. Diego had given my landlord Naomi's number as a contact, and when she called to discuss the lease termination, he was there going through my belongings like a treasure hunter. Oh, don't worry about the security deposit. My sister left me very well provided for. In fact, if you know anyone looking for an investor in the food service industry, I'm about to be very liquid. Very liquid. As if my death was just a convenient financial event that had solved his cash flow problems. He'd already started spending money he didn't have, buying new clothes for investor meetings and putting a deposit on commercial kitchen space for his food truck venture. When Naomi asked him if he thought he should wait until the estate was settled, Diego looked at her like she was being unnecessarily cautious. Naomi, you don't understand business. You have to strike while the iron is hot. These investors won't wait around forever, and I've got momentum now. Yana would want me to seize this opportunity. She always said that I just needed the right backing to make it big. What I'd actually said was that he needed to develop some financial discipline and stop treating other people's money like play money. But Diego had a remarkable ability to hear only what supported his latest scheme. Isabella's fantasies were perhaps the most revealing of all. She'd returned from her Arizona retreat refreshed and ready to claim what she saw as her inheritance windfall. Her Instagram stories became a not-so-subtle catalog of everything she planned to buy with family money. Designer handbags with price tags visible in the photos, screenshots of luxury apartment listings in Lincoln Park, a red Audi convertible that she posed with at a dealership.
When Naomi ran into Isabella at the grocery store during the second week after my funeral, Isabella couldn't contain her excitement about her plans. I know it sounds terrible to be thinking about material things so soon after losing Yana, Isabella said, not sounding sorry at all, but I think she'd want us to use her money to improve our lives. She was always so practical. And honestly, I've been living so modestly for so long, sacrificing to make ends meet. It'll be nice to finally live a little. Sacrificing to make ends meet. Isabella, who'd never worked a job that required actual skill or paid less than $20 an hour. Isabella, whose idea of sacrifice was buying generic cereal instead of brand name. Isabella, who'd borrowed money from me for her condo deposit and had never paid back a cent. But perhaps the most painful part of watching my family's greed unfold was seeing how little they actually knew about my financial situation. They assumed I was wealthy because I'd always been able to help them, never considering that my ability to rescue them had come at the cost of my own financial security. They didn't know about the credit card debt I'd accumulated covering Diego's emergencies. They didn't know that I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch most days to save money. They didn't know that my good job barely covered my own expenses after I factored in all the family loans I'd never been repaid. They saw my reliability as evidence of abundance rather than sacrifice. In their minds, I'd been sitting on piles of money, living modestly by choice rather than necessity, saving up a fortune that would now solve all their problems. Meanwhile, Naomi was having very different conversations with Ms. Patel, the estate attorney I'd hired 6 months before my death. Those meetings were conducted in whispered phone calls and private consultations, with Naomi carrying out the wishes I'd documented in painstaking detail. She was very specific about her intentions, Ms. Patel told Naomi during one of their planning sessions. This isn't a will that was written in anger or haste. She thought about this carefully, considered all the implications, and made her choices deliberately. Naomi had read my will in private first, sitting in Ms. Patel's office with tears streaming down her face. She told me later that she was simultaneously proud of me for finally standing up for myself, and heartbroken that I'd felt the need to do it at all. She knew they'd be angry, Naomi said to Ms. Patel, but I don't think even she realized how angry they'd be. As the day of the will reading approached, my family's excitement reached fever pitch. Teresa had already put a hold on the Sarasota condo, Diego had scheduled a celebration dinner with his investors, Isabella had made appointments with interior decorators.
They saw the meeting with Miss Patel as a formality, a legal rubber stamp on what they considered their obvious inheritance. They'd already divided up my life insurance, estimated my savings, and made plans for my belongings. But I'd spent months preparing for this moment, documenting not just my final wishes, but my reasons for making them. I'd recorded videos explaining my decisions, written letters detailing years of unappreciated sacrifice, and carefully structured my estate to send a message that would echo long after my voice was silenced. They thought they were gathering to collect their windfall. They had no idea they were walking into the reckoning I'd been planning since I realized that love without appreciation is just exploitation with a prettier name. The law office of Patel & Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown building that screamed understated success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Lake Michigan, and the conference room where we gathered had probably witnessed countless family dramas, though I doubted many quite like mine. My parents arrived first, Teresa in her best black suit and Luis in a tie I recognized as one I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. They settled into the leather chairs with the air of people attending an important but routine business meeting. Diego burst through the door 5 minutes later, slightly out of breath, but practically vibrating with excitement. "Sorry I'm late," he said to no one in particular. "Had to finish up a call with my investors. They're so excited about the expansion plans we discussed." Isabella made her entrance fashionably late, of course, wearing a designer dress that I was fairly certain she'd charged to a credit card with the intention of paying it off with inheritance money. She'd even gotten her hair done for the occasion, as if this were a celebration rather than the legal resolution of her sister's death. Ms. Patel entered the room carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the kind of neutral expression that comes from years of delivering news that changes lives. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd learned to maintain professional distance from family chaos. "Thank you all for coming," she began, settling behind the polished conference table. "I know this is a difficult time, and I'll try to make this process as straightforward as possible." Naomi sat slightly apart from my family, her hands folded in her lap and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She was the only person in the room who looked like she was attending the reading of a loved one's will, rather than a lottery drawing. "Before we begin with the formal reading," Miss Patel continued, "I should mention that Yana left specific instructions for how she wanted this information presented. She prepared a video message that she requested be played as part of the proceedings."
Diego leaned forward eagerly. "She made a video? That's so like Yana, thinking of everything. She probably wanted to explain how she divided everything up, right?" Miss Patel's expression remained carefully neutral. "Let's begin with the formal reading, and then we'll watch the video as she requested." She opened the folder and pulled out several documents, her voice taking on the formal cadence required for legal proceedings. "I, Yana Morales, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, superseding all previous versions." The legal language washed over my family like background noise. They were waiting for the important parts, the dollar amounts, the asset distributions, the confirmation of their assumptions. Teresa had pulled out a small notebook where I could see she'd already written Sarasota condo at the top of the page. "To my parents, Teresa and Luis Morales, I leave the sum of $1,000 each to be used for any purpose they see fit." The silence that followed was so complete, I could have heard a pin drop in the next room. "I'm sorry," said Teresa slowly. "Did you say 1,000 each?" Ms. Patel nodded and continued reading. "To my brother Diego Morales, I leave the sum of $1,000, with the hope that he will use this money more wisely than he has used previous gifts." Diego's face was shifting from confusion to something approaching panic. "Wait, that can't be right. What about the life insurance? What about her savings?" "To my sister Isabella Morales, I leave the sum of $1,000 and my sincere wish that she will learn to value relationships more than possessions." Isabella's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of anger rising in her cheeks. This is ridiculous. She can't just give us each $1,000. What about everything else? What about the apartment, the bank accounts? Ms. Patel raised her hand gently to quiet the room. If I may continue, the remainder of Yana's estate, including her life insurance policies, savings accounts, investment portfolios, and all personal property, is bequeathed in its entirety to the Esperanza Youth Foundation, with the specific instruction that the funds be used to establish a scholarship program for underprivileged children in the Chicago area. The explosion was immediate and deafening. That's impossible! Teresa was on her feet, her notebook scattered on the floor. This has to be a mistake, some kind of legal error. Yana would never. She's been brainwashed. Diego pointed an accusing finger at Naomi. Someone got to her, convinced her to do this. This isn't legal. Isabella was strangely quiet, but her silence was more terrifying than her siblings' outrage. She was staring at Miss Patel with the kind of focused fury that suggested she was calculating her next move. I assure you, Miss Patel said calmly, raising her voice to be heard over the chaos, this will is completely legal and was executed with all proper procedures. Yana came to me 6 months ago with very clear instructions about her wishes. 6 months ago? Her voice cracked. She planned this 6 months ago? She did. And she asked me to play this video to explain her reasoning. She pressed a button on the laptop in front of her, and suddenly I was there in the room with them. Not physically, of course, but my face filled the wall-mounted monitor, and my voice echoed off the conference room walls. I had recorded the video in Miss Patel's office wearing the blue blouse that Naomi always said brought out my eyes. I looked tired in the recording, the weight of years of disappointment visible in the slight slump of my shoulders, and the careful way I chose my words. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. And you're probably very surprised by what you just heard. The room fell silent except for Naomi's quiet crying. I want you to know that I didn't make this decision to hurt you. I made it because I finally understood the difference between being loved and being useful. For 38 years, I believed that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, helped enough, you would see me as more than just a solution to your problems. Diego shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't interrupt. But when I looked honestly at our relationships, I realized that your love for me was conditional on my ability to provide for you. When did any of you call just to see how I was doing? When did any of you remember my birthday without a Facebook reminder? When did any of you ask about my dreams, my hopes, my fears? Isabella finally found her voice. Turn it off. I don't want to listen to this guilt trip.
But Miss Patel kept the video playing, honoring my final request. The children at the Esperanza Foundation don't love me because I give them money. They love me because I show up. They remember the books I bring them, the stories I tell them, the way I listen when they share their dreams. They don't see me as a bank account or a safety net. They see me as someone who cares about who they are, not what I can do for them. Teresa was crying now, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of rage and self-pity. So I'm leaving my estate to them because they understand something you never did. That love is not a transaction, and family is not defined by blood alone. It's defined by showing up, by caring, by treating each other as whole people worthy of respect and consideration. The video continued for another few minutes, with me explaining specific bequests to the foundation and expressing hope that my family might someday understand why I'd made this choice. But they'd stopped listening. They were too busy calculating their losses and planning their counterattack. When the recording ended, the silence stretched until Miss Patel cleared her throat. Are there any questions about the legal aspects of the will? Yes, Isabella said, her voice sharp as broken glass. How do we contest it?
The ride home from the law office was the longest 20 minutes of my family's lives. They'd driven together in Luis's truck, a cost-saving measure that now trapped them in a confined space with their collective rage and disappointment. Isabella broke the silence first, her voice shaking with fury. "I can't believe she did this to us. After everything we've done for her, everything we sacrificed." "What exactly did we sacrifice for Yana?" The question came from Luis, and it surprised everyone, including him. He wasn't usually the one to ask uncomfortable questions. "Don't start with that," Teresa snapped. "We raised her, supported her, loved her. Family is supposed to take care of family." "When's the last time any of us took care of Yana?" Luis asked quietly. The question hung in the truck's cabin like toxic gas, poisoning the air and making everyone uncomfortable. But instead of facing the truth it represented, they turned their anger toward an easier target. "This is Naomi's fault," Diego said, his voice gaining conviction as he spoke. "She manipulated Yana, filled her head with lies about us. Yana would never have done this on her own." "Absolutely," Isabella agreed, seizing on the narrative that absolved them of responsibility. "That woman has been poisoning our sister against us for years. She's probably been planning this the whole time, worming her way into Yana's confidence so she could steal our inheritance." By the time they reached Teresa and Luis's house, they'd constructed an entire conspiracy theory with Naomi as the villain and themselves as the victims of an elaborate con game. It was easier than examining their own behavior or acknowledging the truth in my recorded words. The phone calls started immediately. Teresa called every family member she could think of, spinning the story to cast themselves as the wronged parties. "Can you believe what that friend of Yana's convinced her to do? Stealing money from her own family to give to strangers? It's criminal." Diego canceled his celebration dinner with investors, but not before trying one last desperate pitch. "Look, there's been a temporary setback with my liquid assets, but I'm exploring legal options to resolve the situation quickly." The investors weren't interested in temporary setbacks or legal complications. By the end of the week, they'd pulled out completely, leaving Diego with a signed lease on commercial kitchen space he couldn't afford and equipment deposits he'd never recover. Isabella's response was the most public, and therefore the most humiliating. She took to social media with the fury of someone who'd never learned to process disappointment privately. Her Instagram story was a masterpiece of self-pity and misdirection. When someone you love is manipulated into betraying their own family, heartbreak, grief, betrayal, family, toxic people, truth. The posts escalated over the following days. Screenshots of text messages she'd sent to Naomi, and that Naomi had wisely ignored, photos of herself crying with captions about stolen dreams and family loyalty, a particularly unhinged video where she claimed that I'd been brainwashed by outsiders who wanted to profit from our tragedy. But it was her direct attack on the Youth Foundation that finally prompted Naomi to break her diplomatic silence. Isabella had posted photos of the foundation's building with captions suggesting that I'd been scammed by a fake charity and that the children there were being exploited by adults who prey on kindness. She had even shown up at the foundation one afternoon demanding to speak to Mr. Alvarez about the money that was stolen from my family. When Naomi learned about Isabella's harassment campaign, she finally lost her composure. She showed up at my parents' house on a Tuesday evening, armed with copies of bank records, photos, and a righteous anger that had been building for weeks. Teresa answered the door with the kind of forced politeness she reserved for people she considered beneath her.
"Naomi, what a surprise!" "We need to talk," Naomi said, pushing past Teresa into the living room where Luis, Diego, and Isabella were gathered around the coffee table, probably plotting their next move. "Actually, we don't," Isabella said, not even looking up from her phone. "We've said everything we need to say to each other." "No," Naomi replied, her voice steady but dangerous. "You've said everything you wanted to say about me, but you haven't listened to anything I need to say about Yana." She pulled out her phone and started reading from Isabella's Instagram posts. Family loyalty? Stolen dreams? Let me tell you about family loyalty, Isabella. Your sister worked overtime every month to help cover your condo payment. She ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch so she could afford to loan Diego money for his latest business scheme. She hadn't bought herself new clothes in 2 years because she was too busy making sure all of you had what you needed. That's not, Diego started to protest. I have bank records, Naomi cut him off, pulling papers from her bag. $15,000 in loans to you over the past 3 years. Not gifts, Diego, loans. That's what she called them in her financial planning documents. Money she expected to be repaid, but never was. She turned to Teresa and Luis. And you two, do you know that your daughter had to delay her own dental work last year because she'd used her medical savings to help with your property tax bill? Do you know that she'd been planning a trip to Europe for 5 years, but kept postponing it because someone in this family always had an emergency that required her money? The room fell silent, but it wasn't the silence of people processing uncomfortable truths. It was the silence of people waiting for the attack to end so they could resume their grievances. She documented everything, Naomi continued, her voice breaking slightly. Not because she was planning to cut you off, but because she was hoping you'd eventually pay her back. She had spreadsheets, payment plans she'd drawn up for Diego, estimates of how long it would take to recover her loans if everyone paid even $50 a month. Why are you doing this? Teresa asked, tears starting to form, but they weren't tears of recognition or remorse. They were tears of frustration at being confronted with information that didn't support their victim narrative. Because you're destroying her memory, Naomi said fiercely. You're painting her as some kind of vindictive person who betrayed her family, when the truth is that she spent her entire adult life trying to hold this family together. And when she finally realized that your love was conditional on her usefulness, she made sure her final act was one of genuine love, not obligation. Those kids don't deserve our money, Isabella finally exploded. They're not family. No, they're not family, Naomi agreed. But they loved Yana for who she was, not what she could give them. They showed up to her funeral. They cried real tears. They made her cards and drawings and told stories about how she'd changed their lives. Where were you? The question hung in the air like an indictment, but my family had already moved beyond shame into something harder and more destructive, entitlement mixed with self-righteous fury. Get out, Teresa said quietly. Get out of our house. Gladly, Naomi replied, gathering her papers. But I want you to know that I will be watching. If you harass those kids or that foundation, if you try to turn this into some kind of public battle, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of family Yana came from and why she made the choice she did. As Naomi left, my family closed ranks around their wounded pride and financial disappointment. They would contest the will, they decided. They would hire lawyers and fight my final wishes in court. They would tell anyone who would listen that I'd been manipulated, that I wasn't in my right mind, that I'd betrayed the people who loved me most. But deep down, in the places they didn't want to examine, they knew the truth. They knew that my will reading hadn't been a betrayal, it had been a mirror, reflecting back the relationships they'd built with me over 38 years. The problem wasn't that the mirror lied, the problem was that it told the truth. And the truth was something they'd spent years avoiding. They would fight my will not because they believed they deserved my money, but because accepting my decision would mean accepting responsibility for the choices that led to it. And that was something they were still not ready to do. The morning after her confrontation with my family, Naomi drove to the South Side with a mixture of anticipation and heartbreak in her chest. She carried with her the legal documents that would officially transfer my estate to the Esperanza Youth Foundation, but more importantly, she carried stories she wanted to share about who I really was.
The foundation looked different in the harsh light of November morning. The converted warehouse that had seemed so full of possibility during my evening visits now showed its age more clearly. Peeling paint, cracked windows, a parking lot that needed repaving. But as Naomi approached the front door, she could hear something that made all the cosmetic problems irrelevant: the sound of children laughing. Mr. Alvarez met her in the lobby, his weathered hands clasping hers with genuine warmth. He was a man in his early 60s who'd spent his entire career working with at-risk youth, and his face showed both the exhaustion and joy that came with that calling.
Ms. Clark, thank you for coming. The children have been asking about Miss Yana every day since the funeral. They know something important is happening, but we wanted to wait for you before we explained everything. As they walked through the main activity room, Naomi was struck by how the space felt like home, despite its institutional origins. Handmade decorations covered the walls, beanbag chairs were scattered in reading corners, and the air smelled like crayons and hope. It was exactly the kind of place where I would have thrived, where my love of learning and nurturing could flourish without the complications of family obligation. Miss Naomi! Sophia ran up to them, her dark eyes bright with excitement. Are you here to tell us about Miss Yana's surprise? Mr. A said she left us something special. Before Naomi could answer, she was surrounded by a dozen children ranging in age from 7 to 16, all chattering excitedly about their memories of me. Marcus, now 9, still carried the astronomy book I'd given him, its pages worn soft from constant reading. Lucia clutched a notebook filled with stories she'd written, each one dedicated for Miss Yana, who taught me that words are magic. She always remembered our birthdays, said Jasmine, a quiet 13-year-old who'd been coming to the foundation for 3 years. Not just remembered them, but really celebrated them. She'd bring cupcakes for everyone and make the birthday person feel like they were the most important kid in the world. She helped me with my college applications, added Carlos, a 17-year-old who'd aged out of most youth programs, but still volunteered at the foundation. Stayed after hours to review my essays, drove me to campus visits, even helped me practice for interviews. When I got accepted to UIC with a partial scholarship, she cried harder than my mom did. As the children shared their memories, Naomi began to understand the scope of my secret life. I hadn't just been a donor or occasional volunteer, I'd been a constant presence in their lives, someone who showed up consistently and invested in their individual dreams and struggles. She started the homework help program, Mr. Alvarez explained as they moved to his small office. 3 years ago, she noticed that many of our kids were falling behind in math and reading, so she organized a group of volunteers to provide tutoring. But when we couldn't find enough volunteers, she started coming in 4 nights a week herself. He pulled out a thick folder labeled Miss Yana, Programs and Ideas. Inside were dozens of handwritten notes in my careful script outlining educational initiatives, fundraising ideas, and detailed plans for expanding the foundation's services. She wanted to start a scholarship fund for kids who are aging out of foster care. She'd researched everything, the application process, the selection criteria, even the mentorship component. She said every kid deserves someone who believed in their potential. Naomi found herself crying as she read through my notes. Here was evidence of the dreams I'd never shared with my family, the passion projects I'd pursued in secret because I knew they would see them as distractions from my real responsibilities to them. There's something else, Mr. Alvarez said quietly, reaching into his desk drawer. He left this for us to open only after she was gone. He handed Naomi a sealed envelope marked, "For the Esperanza family, when I can't be there anymore." Inside was a letter in my handwriting and a USB drive. Naomi read the letter aloud to the gathered staff and older children. "My dear Esperanza family, if you're reading this, it means my time with you has ended sooner than any of us had hoped. But I want you to know that the hours I spent within these walls were the happiest of my adult life. You taught me what it means to be valued for who you are rather than what you can provide.
I'm leaving you my estate not as charity, but as an investment in the future I believe you're all capable of creating. Use the money to dream bigger, reach higher, and never let anyone tell you that your circumstances define your possibilities. The USB drive contains videos I recorded for each of you, letters I wanted you to have for me, reminders of how proud I am of who you are becoming. You are my chosen family, and you carry my love forward with everything you achieve. All my love, Miss Yana. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when Naomi finished reading. Even the youngest children understood that they'd lost someone irreplaceable, but they also understood that they'd been chosen, valued, and loved in a way that would change their lives forever. "How much money did she leave?" asked 16-year-old Angela, always practical. Mr. Alvarez consulted the legal documents Naomi had brought. With her life insurance, savings, and the proceeds from selling her apartment and belongings, the foundation will receive approximately $143,000. The number hung in the air like a miracle. For these children, whose families often struggled to afford basic necessities, it was an almost incomprehensible sum. But more than the money, they understood what it represented: validation that their dreams mattered to someone who had the power to change their lives, even in death. "We can start the scholarship program she wanted," Mr. Alvarez said, his voice filled with wonder. "We can hire more tutors, update our computer lab, maybe even expand to serve more kids from the neighborhood."
As Naomi watched the children process this incredible gift, she realized that my family's loss was truly these children's gain. The money that Teresa and Luis had wanted for a retirement condo would instead send kids to college. The funds Diego had earmarked for his food truck would provide tutoring and mentorship. The designer clothes Isabela had coveted would become textbooks, computers, and opportunities. "There's going to be a ceremony," Mr. Alvarez told the group, "an official dedication of the Yana Morales Scholarship Fund. We want to celebrate her life and what she meant to all of us." As the afternoon wore on, Naomi found herself thinking about the contrast between this room full of grateful, loving children and the bitter family meeting she'd endured the night before. Here, my death was being honored as a catalyst for positive change. At my parents' house, it was being mourned as a financial disappointment. The children began planning the memorial ceremony with the kind of enthusiasm they brought to everything they cared about. They wanted to create a memory wall with photos and stories, perform songs and poems I'd loved, and plant a garden in my honor in the small courtyard behind the building. "Miss Yana always said that love grows when you plant it in good soil," Sophia explained to Naomi. "We want to plant flowers that will come back every year, so she'll always be here with us." As Naomi prepared to leave that evening, she was approached by Jasmine, the quiet 13-year-old who'd spoken about birthday celebrations. "Miss Naomi, can I tell you something? Something I never told Miss Yana?" Naomi nodded, sensing that this was important. "My mom works 3 jobs, and sometimes she can't pick me up from here until really late. Miss Yana never made me feel bad about that. She'd stay with me, help me with homework, or sometimes we'd just talk about books. She never acted like it was a problem or like she had somewhere more important to be." Jasmine paused, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I know her family is angry about the money, but they don't understand. Miss Yana didn't just give us money, she gave us her time. And time is the thing adults never want to share. But she shared hers with us like we mattered as much as anything else in her life." Driving home that evening, Naomi understood something that had been eluding her since my death. My family was mourning the loss of their safety net, their reliable source of financial rescue. But the children at Esperanza were mourning the loss of someone who'd seen their potential and invested in their dreams without expecting anything in return. They were mourning the loss of unconditional love, while my family was mourning the loss of unconditional support. The difference between those two things explained everything about why I'd made the choice I had. But my family wasn't done fighting. In fact, they were just getting started.
The war began 3 days after Naomi's visit to the foundation. I say war because that's what it felt like. A calculated campaign designed to destroy my reputation, discredit my final wishes, and somehow reclaim what my family had convinced themselves was rightfully theirs. Teresa fired the first shot with a phone call to Naomi at 7 in the morning, her voice sharp with righteous indignation. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, and I realize now what really happened here. You manipulated my daughter. You isolated her from her family, filled her head with lies about us, and convinced her to change her will. That's elder abuse, Naomi, and I won't let you profit from it." Naomi, who had been sipping coffee and preparing for work, nearly choked on her drink. Elder abuse? Teresa, Yana was 38 years old and completely mentally competent. And I'm not profiting from anything. The money went to charity. Don't play innocent with me. You were named executor, which means you get fees. And I'm sure you've positioned yourself to benefit somehow from that foundation. You probably planned this whole thing together. The accusation was so absurd that Naomi actually laughed, which only infuriated Teresa more. "You think this is funny? Stealing from a grieving family? We're going to contest that will, and when we do, everyone's going to see what kind of person you really are." But Teresa's phone calls were just the opening salvo. The real assault came from Diego, who had decided that if he couldn't inherit my money, he'd find another way to capitalize on the situation. He showed up at the foundation on a Thursday afternoon, wearing his most expensive suit and carrying a folder of documents. When Mr. Alvarez met him in the lobby, Diego's first words were not condolences or questions about how the children were coping with my death. "I'm Diego Morales, Yana's brother, and I'm here to conduct an audit of this organization's financials." Mr. Alvarez, a gentleman who'd spent his career working with troubled youth, was completely unprepared for Diego's aggressive approach.
I'm sorry, Mr. Morales, but I'm not sure what you mean by an audit. We're a registered nonprofit with all our financial records properly filed. My sister left you over $100,000, Diego interrupted, and my family wants to make sure that money is being used appropriately. We have legal standing as her beneficiaries to examine how our inheritance is being spent. But you're not beneficiaries, Mr. Alvarez pointed out gently. The will was very clear about the distribution of assets. Diego's facade of legal authority crumbled, revealing the desperate anger underneath. That will is fraudulent, and when we prove it in court, every penny you've taken will have to be returned with interest. So I'd be very careful about how you spend money that doesn't belong to you. He spent an hour stalking through the foundation, taking photos with his phone, making notes, and questioning staff members about their relationships with me. His presence terrified the younger children, who'd never seen an adult behave so aggressively in their safe space. When 8-year-old Marcus asked if the angry man was going to take away Miss Yana's gift to them, Diego's response revealed just how far he'd fallen from basic human decency. That money belongs to her real family, kid, people who actually loved her, not strangers who tricked her into giving away what wasn't hers to give. Mr. Alvarez quickly ushered Diego out after that, but the damage was done. The children were scared and confused, worried that their miracle was going to be taken away by people who seemed to hate them for no reason they could understand. Meanwhile, Isabella had taken her campaign digital, using social media to wage a war of public opinion. Her Instagram account became a daily chronicle of manufactured victimhood with carefully curated posts designed to cast my family as the wronged parties in a heartbreaking betrayal. "Day 12 without my sister," read one post, accompanied by a black and white photo of us from Christmas 3 years ago. "Still processing how someone I loved could be turned against her own blood. Hashtag grief, hashtag betrayal, hashtag family first, hashtag toxic friends." She created a hashtag, hashtag justice for Yana, and encouraged her followers to share stories about family members who'd been manipulated by outsiders. The posts grew increasingly unhinged, with Isabella claiming that I'd been brainwashed by a cult-like organization and that my final video message had been recorded under duress.
But it was her attack on the children that crossed the line from pathetic to cruel. She posted photos of the foundation building with captions like, "Where predators convince lonely people to abandon their families," and "These people convinced my sister that strangers were more important than the people who raised her." Most damaging was a post where she shared photos of individual children from the foundation's website, with captions suggesting they were actors hired to manipulate vulnerable donors. She claimed that I'd been seduced by a sophisticated scam that targets childless women with disposable income. The post was reported and taken down within hours, but not before it had been screenshot and shared by Isabella's followers, spreading the cruel lie that these vulnerable children were somehow complicit in defrauding my family. When Naomi learned about Isabella's social media campaign, her protective instincts flared to life. She'd stayed mostly silent through the family's initial outrage, hoping they'd eventually accept my decision and move on. But attacking innocent children was something she couldn't ignore. She started documenting everything: screenshots of Isabella's posts, recordings of Teresa's increasingly unhinged voicemails, notes about Diego's harassment at the foundation. If my family wanted to turn this into a public battle, she was prepared to fight back with the truth. The legal assault came next, orchestrated by Luis, who'd been quietly consulting with attorneys about the possibility of contesting my will. He'd found a lawyer willing to take the case on contingency, attracted by the size of the estate and the family's claims of undue influence. The lawsuit was filed on a Friday afternoon, with papers served to both Naomi and the foundation. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the core argument was simple. I'd been manipulated by Naomi and the foundation into changing my will, and my true intentions were to provide for my family. As evidence, they cited my years of financial support for family members, character references from people who barely knew me, and expert testimony about the vulnerability of single women to charitable manipulation. It was all lies, of course, but lies wrapped in legal language and presented with the authority of the court system. More importantly, it was expensive lies, the kind that required lawyers and expert witnesses and court fees that the foundation couldn't afford to fight back. But my family had underestimated both Naomi's determination and the power of community support. When word spread about the lawsuit, something beautiful happened. Former coworkers contributed to a legal defense fund. Neighbors who'd barely known me donated money and wrote character references. The foundation's board of directors hired their own attorney and prepared to fight back.
Most importantly, Miss Patel, the estate attorney who'd helped me craft my will, agreed to represent the foundation pro bono, outraged by my family's attempts to overturn what she knew to be my completely voluntary and well-considered final wishes. The battle lines were drawn, and both sides prepared for a war that would either validate my final choice or destroy everything I'd tried to build with my death. But I had one more card to play, one final message that I'd left specifically for this moment, when my family's true nature would be fully revealed, and they'd need to hear the hardest truths I'd never been able to speak while I was alive. The recording I'd left for my family's private viewing was different from the formal video played at the will rating. That first message had been measured, legal, designed to explain my decision to lawyers and courts. This one was personal, intimate, and devastatingly honest. The conversation I'd never had the courage to have while I was alive. Naomi had been holding on to it for weeks, waiting for the right moment to deliver my final words. That moment came when she learned about the lawsuit, the harassment at the foundation, and Isabella's cruel social media campaign. If my family wanted a war, they were going to face the full truth about why they'd lost it. She called Teresa on a Tuesday morning, her voice calm, but carrying an undertone of steel. There's one more recording Yana left. This one is specifically for family members only, and she asks me to share it when you are ready to listen. I think that time has come. "We're not interested in more manipulation," Teresa replied coldly. "This isn't manipulation, Teresa. This is goodbye. Real goodbye. From your daughter to the people who raised her. She deserves to have her final words heard by the people she loved, even if that love wasn't returned the way she needed it to be." Something in Naomi's tone must have penetrated Teresa's defensive anger, because she agreed to gather the family at her house that evening. Even Isabella flew back from whatever expensive retreat she'd been attending, sensing that this was a crucial moment in their legal battle. They assembled in the living room where I had spent countless family gatherings, Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, the rare Sunday dinners when everyone could coordinate their schedules. It felt fitting that my final words to them would be delivered in the space where so many of our complicated family dynamics had played out over the years. Naomi set up her laptop on the coffee table, and my face filled the screen one last time. But this version of me looked different from the formal will reading. I'd recorded this message in my own apartment, wearing a simple sweater with no makeup and evidence of recent tears on my face. I looked exhausted, but also oddly peaceful, like someone who'd finally found the courage to speak a truth she'd been carrying for years. "If you're watching this," my recorded self began, "it means everything has played out exactly as I expected it would. You're angry about the will, you're fighting to get the money, and you're probably blaming everyone except yourselves for the choices that led to this moment." Diego shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but he didn't interrupt. "I want to tell you about the day I decided to change my will. It was 6 months before my death, on a Tuesday morning, when Diego called asking for money for his rent. As usual, he promised it was the last time, and as usual, I said yes, because that's what I always did." The camera caught my slight smile, sad but not bitter. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to remember the last time any of you had called just to see how I was doing. Not because you needed something, not because there was a crisis, but just because you missed me and wanted to hear my voice. I paused in the recording, and the silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. I couldn't remember a single time. Not one phone call in all my adult years that was about me, instead of about what I could do for you. Teresa made a small sound of protest, but the recording continued. "Mommy, I know you love me, but your love has always come with conditions and expectations. You love me when I'm successful at work, when I'm helping family members, when I'm being the responsible daughter who holds everyone together. But you've never loved me just for being me. The woman who reads poetry, who dreams about traveling, who sometimes feels lonely and scared and needs someone to listen." My mother was crying now, but they were the complicated tears of someone who was hearing difficult truths mixed with painful accuracy. "Poppy, I know you're proud of my financial success, but you've never asked about the cost of that success. You don't know that I work overtime almost every week to afford the loans I give to Diego. You don't know that I haven't been to a doctor in 2 years because I spent my medical savings of Isabella's condo deposit. You see the results of my sacrifices, but you've never been curious about the sacrifices themselves." Louis was staring at his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "Diego, my beautiful, dreamy brother, I've bailed you out of every financial crisis for 10 years, and in all that time, you've never once asked if I could afford it. You've never wondered if lending you money meant I had to give up something I wanted for myself. You just assumed that my money was your money whenever you needed it." Diego started to stand up, his face flushing with anger or shame. "Sit down," I said from the screen, as if I'd anticipated his reaction. "If you can't listen to this, you'll never understand why you're not getting what you thought you deserved." He sat back down, his jaw clenched tight. "Isabella, my baby sister, you've spent our entire adult relationship making me feel small and boring and insufficient. My apartment wasn't nice enough, my clothes weren't fashionable enough, my life wasn't exciting enough for your approval. But when you needed money or help or someone to co-sign a lease, suddenly my boring stability was exactly what you needed." Isabella was staring at the screen with a mixture of fury and something that might have been recognition. "Here's what breaks my heart about all of this," I continued, my voice softening. "I would have given you anything, my money, my time, my life, if you had just seen me as a complete person instead of a resource to be managed. If you had celebrated my successes instead of taking them for granted, if you had asked about my dreams instead of assuming I didn't have any." The room was completely silent except for the sound of quiet crying.
The children at the foundation don't love me because I give them money. They love me because I show up to their science fairs, because I remember their favorite books, because I listen when they tell me about their hopes and fears. They see me as someone whose presence in my life is a gift, not a given. My image on the screen leaned forward slightly, as if trying to bridge the distance between life and death, between love and obligation. I forgive you for not knowing how to love me the way I needed to be loved. I know you did the best you could with the emotional tools you had, but I won't let my final act be defined by your expectations or your needs. For the first time in my adult life, I'm choosing to give my love to people who will treasure it instead of taking it for granted. I took a deep breath in the recording, gathering strength for my final words. I hope someday you'll understand that this wasn't about punishing you. This was about rewarding the people who showed me what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. This was about making sure my legacy is one of genuine love instead of dutiful obligation. The recording ended with me looking directly into the camera, my eyes clear and determined. I love you all. I always have and I always will. But love without respect is just another form of using someone. I hope you learn the difference before it's too late to build real relationships with the people who matter to you. The screen went black and the living room fell into absolute silence. Teresa was the first to break, sobbing with the kind of raw grief that comes from recognizing a truth you can't undo. All the anger, all the legal threats, all the desperate attempts to paint themselves as victims, none of it could change the basic accuracy of what I'd said. Diego stood up abruptly, knocking over the coffee table in his haste to leave. "This is bullshit," he said, but his voice cracked on the words. "She's trying to make us feel guilty from the grave. This is manipulation, pure and simple." But even as he stormed out, everyone in the room could see that his anger was just armor protecting a wound he wasn't ready to examine. Isabella sat frozen on the couch, staring at the blank screen. For once in her life, she seemed to be processing something deeper than surface-level emotion. "Did I really make her feel boring?" she asked quietly, almost to herself. Luis reached over and took Teresa's hand, and for a moment they looked like the couple who'd raised me before decades of life had worn down their capacity for emotional intimacy. "Maybe we got it wrong," he whispered. As Naomi packed up her laptop, she realized that my final message had accomplished something the legal will reading hadn't. It had cracked open my family's defensive wall and forced them to face the relationship they actually had with me, not the one they'd constructed in their memories. Whether that crack would widen into genuine self-reflection or seal itself shut with renewed resentment remained to be seen. But I'd said what I needed to say, delivered the truth I'd carried in silence for too many years. My voice was finally fully heard. And in the end, that mattered more than whether they chose to listen. 6 months after my death, the Esperanza Youth Foundation unveiled something beautiful. A mural painted by the children I'd loved, showing me surrounded by books, butterflies, and dreams taking flight. My painted smile watches over the main activity room where kids still gather each afternoon, now funded by scholarships that will change their lives forever. Naomi stands among them often, having become the foundation's volunteer coordinator. She mentors Sophia, who reminds me of my younger self, brilliant, determined, hungry for opportunities. 3 kids are heading to college this fall on full scholarships from my estate. Marcus still carries his astronomy book, now planning to study astrophysics. Across the street, my family sometimes drive by. Teresa, Luis, Diego, and Isabella, watching from their car windows like strangers peering into a life they were never part of. Their lawsuit failed. Their anger hardened into permanent bitterness. They lost more than money. They lost the chance to understand what love actually means. But here, in this converted warehouse filled with laughter and possibility, my legacy thrives. These children know something my blood family never learned, that true family isn't born, it's built, one act of unconditional love at a time. I am finally, completely, home.